Okay, wow. I'm still blown away by that presentation. I remember when I was 13 years old, I couldn't have done any of this. So I'm really totally excited about what you did. Thank you so much. As Mario already said, my name is Michael. I work for a business angel fund, to be precise. We're called Speedinvest, and we don't see ourselves as investors at all. We're entrepreneurs. We're a startup ourselves. About 3 years ago, we started 6 partners, so 5 at that time actually, and we felt that there is a need for a cool investor in Austria, because at that time, to be very frank, there were no investors at all, or very little of them, and no one who would really actually understand what a startup needed and could help them along the way we would have wanted an investor to be back then when we were ourselves entrepreneurs. And we still feel more like an entrepreneur than we do feel like an investor. So I've got a couple of questions for you before I want to start. So who in this room is an investor himself, or would name? Okay, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, who has a startup? Okay, who has an investor in this startup? Okay, 1, 2, 3. So I hope I don't bore you with this. I tried to come up with some stories that we've encountered along the lines, stuff that really happened. I'm not telling any sort of funky stories, but stuff that happened to us. And by those stories, I'm trying to explain a bit what makes us invest into a startup. So what gets us excited, and what gets us to do a bit like this, the face palm that you also have as an investor, sort of the what the fucks of a business angel, I call this. I wrote a little series on this, and still, after 1.5 years since I wrote this, I'm encountering stuff like this. So Speedinvest, as I said, is a business angel fund, 6 partners. We have 4 on the ground in Vienna. One of them is Oliver, who has already been mentioned, and probably a lot of you know, or some of you might know. And 2 of them are on the ground in Silicon Valley, Eric and Marcel. They moved there with their families, or are originally from there. So we have quite some knowledge about the 2 scenes, and I'd also try to mix that in a bit and give you a perception of what we see as differences between Europe, Austria, and the Silicon Valley. So the first, I'd like to start with stories that we really had. Like, information is our business. I mean, that's what we do. We looked at about 1,300 startups in the past 3 years. That's the deal flow from the region, so Austria and Central and Eastern Europe, a bit of Germany, but that's it basically. So quite a number of startups. And you think that now it has sort of trickled down through the ecosystem, that probably your average VC is not going to sign an NDA because you want to protect your super cool idea. Because as I once heard, ideas are nothing. I have an idea every second, and probably Danielle and her father, you have ideas when you walk on the hills of the Silicon Valley, an idea every second, but that's not what is important, right? The thing is about execution. You need to be able to get that idea to the market, and no, I'm probably not going to sign an NDA, because to be very frank, I probably saw this idea already, because you're also not the only one having this idea. And the other thing that also quite frequently happens, what really surprises me, I mean, if you go to a sales pitch, you probably look at your client or prospective client and try to figure out what's that guy looking for, what does the company need, how am I going to sell this to this person? And really, like 50% of the startups that we talk to, they don't ever look at our website. They don't have a look what our investment criteria is. They don't have a look how much money we invest. So that's a thing that really puzzles me quite often, that people show up and say, yeah, they want to raise $1 million for an apartment complex in Turkey. And then we say, yeah, we're investing in internet startups, and maximum 500K. And they're also always very disappointed about this. So you can actually save that time. Second one is your deck sells, your Excel convinces. So no, we're probably not going to read a business plan that has 40 pages and goes on about like the prospects of this in 2018 with cash flow metrics and all that kind of stuff. We're not going to look at this. It's about 10 pages of slide deck. That's all we need. And if you're not able to convince us in those 10 pages of slide deck, then probably your idea is too complex, or you're not convinced of it yourself. Also, getting a slide deck where the first valuable info about the product is on page 31. is probably not going to get our attention. And that's true stories. I can show you that deck. It has 50 slides, and we sat together in our pipeline meeting where we basically screened those opportunities, and then we ended up looking for, so what's the product like? I mean, I want to see the product. And then finally on page 31, we found it. And also that Excel with 20 tabs of revenue metrics with different scenarios is probably not gonna get us excited, because what we need is basically a simple calculation, something that fits on a piece of paper where you show you what are the 3 or 4 major drivers of your business. Is it gonna be clients? Is it gonna be downloads? Is it gonna be a conversion rate? What's the driver that really makes money in the end? And to be very frank, although we love stuff that changes the world, we're a startup ourselves, and our business model is to buy and sell startups. So that's something very, very simple, and that's why we need that kind of stuff. But we don't need those bullshit metrics that you always find. Now, everyone these days is a metrics-driven startup. They all do care about a lot of metrics. And that's an actual example of the presentation. A startup sent to us a slide deck, really good slide deck. And in the end, it had this competition index. And we went like, a competition index? Why haven't we ever heard of this? And then we looked up the formula that they were using, that they created themselves, where they basically would benchmark their startup by using a combined metric of the Alexa rank and the page rank by registered users and traffic, and then came up with that they're basically the industry leader. No, we didn't invest in that startup. That's probably obvious. Now let's say we came to terms, we talked, we got to know each other, we did the dance. That probably takes 2 or 3 meetings. We'd like to get to know the startup that we invest in. It's really much more like a partnership, so I can very much relate to that CFO that Bankaroo has. It's a bit like you love your investor, but you are a bit frustrated at times because they keep looking at the numbers and they're not always good. And one number that we have to look at some point is the valuation. And you wouldn't believe how many startups and how many deals that we make actually break apart because there are totally different expectations on valuation. And that always puzzles me, because I think if you have a startup, you want to change the world, you want to do this, do 1.24% of shares that you give away for your investor really change the way you feel about this idea? Does that do any difference? And that's the thing. You keep on talking like 2 or 3 weeks, going back and forth about the valuation, whether it will be 2.5 or 3 million, when in fact, after sort of all the capital that you might need, you end up with a zero something % difference in the end. And that's really, really interesting to see. And also what is really interesting is that we have a lot of startups that then end up sending us business plan calculations that have been verified by their tax accountant using the discounted cash flow method, coming up with an enterprise value of 10 million for a pre-revenue, pre-product startup that basically is just a slide deck. So no, we didn't invest in that startup either. And that's also a big difference, coming to differences US versus Europe. Of course, in the US, in the Valley, benchmarking your startup idea against any other US idea, you will definitely find higher valuations in the Valley. That's absolutely true. You probably get more money to try out your idea, and you'll probably have a higher valuation because, and that's the problem, it's a market. And that market is different in Europe. The number of investors is simply a tiny fraction of the number of investors in the US. The money available is simply a fraction. But also the number of startups, of good startups, is less. It's much less than probably in the Valley. But still, you have to benchmark this against each other. So if people show up and say, yeah, but this startup in the US, they already have raised 10 million at a 30 million valuation, and they're also only launching their product next year, then we say, yes, that might be true, but we're not even able to give you 10 million, let alone pay a 30 million valuation. So that's one of the main differences, I'd say, that we see quite frequently. And then after this, there comes the honeymoon period, where we're tied to each other. It's a very nice relationship. We figured out how we want to handle things. We need to set up contracts and that kind of stuff. And then funny things happen. There's a lot of startups that in the negotiation phase then say, well, we're startup founders, 3 of them. We came from a consulting firm. We earned decent money there, and we want to earn at least half of what you had there, or let's say 2/3. That's probably fair because, we're founders. We're going to work our asses off, and I could earn a lot of money elsewhere. Like if I go to consulting again, that's a decent amount of money. And then we always have to tell them, yeah, but you're in a startup, and you made that conscious decision. You definitely have to know that you're going to work your ass off for the next 3 years. And if your company fails or doesn't produce any revenues, it's going to be you who doesn't get a salary while you're paying the guy next to you who does the programming, and he's going home at 8 o'clock probably, or 9 o'clock, and you're going to stay until midnight. That's the deal. That's why you're an entrepreneur, because that thing belongs to you. You're incentivized by the stuff that happens later on and not by the money you get from salaries. And also, to be very frank, the math doesn't add up, because if you are 3 founders and each of you wants to get 5K, that's 15K a month. You'll burn all the money that we gave you in probably a year, only paying your salaries. And that really puzzles me that we have to have this discussion. And we also have very often a discussion where we say, no, you can't hire 20 people just because you probably need them, because there's just not enough money there. And yes, you have to hire people, but we're probably not going to raise another $1 million in 6 months. That's also just very unrealistic. So to turn this around a bit, what does get us excited? When do we sit across the room or across the table in the room and really feel that we're into this? What does turn us on in some way? Because we love to do this. We're really excited about helping other people reach their goals. And I have a very, very recent story that totally touched me personally. So we met this little startup in Slovenia 1.5 years ago. A very nice team that basically was starting a subscription service, e-commerce subscription service. And we helped them, we invested in them. And now 1.5 years later, 3 weeks ago, they got accepted into Y Combinator, into the summer batch. And they're moving to the US. And if I remember that moment 18 months ago where we basically talked to them and they say, we want to found a company, we want to take this international. This is an international business. We want to make this a global thing. That's big. That's really big. We believe this can be huge. And now they're talking to PG, which is Paul Graham, the guy who runs Y Combinator. He's only dubbed PG there, I learned. And PG says, that could be IPO-able. That really touches me, that we've got them so far, from a little garage in Ljubljana to Y Combinator. And that's what we like. We like if they share their story. If they're passionate about this. We like if they love what they do, because we do love what we do. And that's the reason why we're in this. We love people who know their market better than we do. Because to be very frank, in many meetings, we know the market better after Googling for 5 minutes than the startup does themselves. And that's usually the moment when we stop the talks. Because this is what you have to know. You have to know your enemies. And even if you think your startup is the coolest shit in town and you're going to blow them all away, and there's nothing like that, there's always competition. Because either nobody needs what you're producing, or there's already tons of solutions out there that basically do the job. And I have to be very open about this. We like money. Not because we think money solves all the problems in the world, but this is our business model. That's why we're here for. We got 10 million by 32 investors, private people who all believed that when we told them about that startups are the new cool thing, they thought, well, yeah, startups, don't know. But these guys, they seem to be very excited about it. They're not totally bogus. Yeah, we'll probably try this out. So we have some responsibility to deliver numbers, and that's the reason why we like business cases that add up. And if we manage to invest in a startup like this, that's sort of the moment when we all like it. And we like founders we like founder teams, we like founders, we like to work with people who are really interested in the details and really interested to understand how this works. All of our startups, and we have 18 of them, 18 investments, all of our startups have founder teams where I myself always think after working with them for 2 or 3 hours that I learned a lot about stuff they're doing, about the world, because they really work the details. They really push the border, push the boundary, and invent stuff on the way. And that's what gets me excited. That's what every one of us gets excited. We learn tons of stuff along the way. Now, after 3 years, we have a huge number of investments in the fintech area, and we didn't know anything about fintech 3 years ago. And that's great. And we didn't know anything about subscription services, and I didn't know anything about booze, but then we invested in this Flavier thing, and now I get sent a little box of whiskey every week. So that's how this changes our lives. And that's it. And if you have a startup that you want to show us, tell us about it, and we'd love to get excited about it. Thanks.